The office hummed with the soft drone of fluorescent lights and the distant whir of the printer that hadn't been cleaned in months. I sat at my desk, sipping a coffee that had already gone lukewarm. When the subject line popped up in my inbox like a red flag, I couldn't ignore discounted tier guidelines. Knoxwell Workshop. No greeting, no explanation, just a single attachment labeled FA Internal Only. My stomach tightened. I'd been in this company long enough to recognize the signs of a storm before it hit. A discounted tier was corporate code for we're about to give away work for free and call it strategy, and I knew exactly whose hands would deliver that free labor mine. I clicked the file open and skimmed the vague bullet points. It mentioned goodwill adjustments, waived fees, and strategic client positioning. All of it danced around the same fact: Trent was setting up a deal that would make Knoxwell think they were getting something extra, while he pocketed the credit and I carried the weight. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline the threat, another email pinged at first glance. It looked like more routine spam from the Knoxwell project folder, but as I opened it, my pulse skipped. It wasn't meant for me. The header read, Procurement Review Vendor Trent Solutions, Underperformance Assessment. I read it twice to make sure my eyes weren't lying. Knoxwell's own procurement team was questioning our performance. Words like lagging metrics and client dissatisfaction leapt off the screen. Someone at Knoxwell already knew Trent wasn't delivering. My boss had been polishing his fake halo, but the client saw the cracks. A shiver ran down my spine. Equal parts dread and clarity. If Knoxwell decided to sever ties, Trent wouldn't take the hit. He'd slide my name onto the blame line without hesitation. I'd be the scapegoat for years of his shortcuts, and maybe the only one holding the keys to save him if it came to that. The low murmur of the office faded as I sat back, letting the email glow against my monitor. For the first time in months, I felt the balance shift. I wasn't just a ghost in Trent's shadow anymore. I was holding a secret that could decide which way this storm broke. Somewhere beyond our dusty office windows, the Knoxwell Tower gleamed in the Chicago sunlight, a silent reminder of the battle I hadn't realized I was already in. 8 years is a long time to be invisible. I'd spent them building workshops that carried other people's names, pouring my nights into slide decks and assessments no one knew I made. There were evenings when I sat alone in the office, the hum of the air vents my only company, arranging exercises and scenario guides that Trent would present as his own masterstrokes. I told myself it was temporary. That every late night, every missed birthday, every holiday spent answering client emails was just a down payment on the promotion he kept dangling in front of me. Next quarter, he'd say with that smooth smile, once the numbers stabilize. The numbers never did. Outside of work. Life wasn't easier. My father's health had started to slip 3 years ago, and I spent weekends driving to the suburbs to manage his medications and fix the leaky roof he couldn't climb anymore. The mortgage on my small apartment and the medical bills for Dad's treatments clung to my bank account like lead weights. The idea of leaving, even for a better job, was terrifying. I couldn't afford a gap, not even for a month, every so often. I'd catch my reflection in the black glass of my monitor after midnight, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and wonder if this was how people disappeared. Not with a loud failure, but with a slow erosion of self, until there was nothing left but someone else's work and someone else's victories. Then, one afternoon, a whisper slid through the office. HR was preparing a layoff list if the Knoxwell contract didn't renew. I brushed it off at first, until I saw the spreadsheet left open on a junior coordinator's screen. My name sat in the potential cut column, highlighted in yellow like a warning sign. The weight of it pressed on me harder than any deadline ever had. I wasn't just invisible, I was expendable. And yet, somewhere under the fear, a spark caught. If I was already on the chopping block, Maybe it was time to stop living like I owed Trent my silence. The next morning, I arrived at the office with that thought simmering beneath my calm, just as Trent summoned me to the hallway before the Knoxwell workshop. The morning of the Knoxwell workshop began with the same anxious hum that had followed me for weeks, but sharper, like the air before a thunderstorm. I had arrived early, as always, carrying my laptop, my backup drive, and the quiet determination that today would decide something. Trent intercepted me in the hallway outside the client floor, a polished corridor of marble and glass that smelled faintly of stale coffee and floor polish. He had 2 cups in his hands, neither of them for me, and that thin smile he wore when he thought he was untouchable. "Quick word," he said, stepping close enough that I caught the sour edge of yesterday's espresso on his breath. "Run today's session as goodwill. Corporate wants Knoxwell happy." I blinked, certain I had misheard. Goodwill. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "For free. Don't make it a thing. Or, if this is too hard for you, clear your desk after the meeting. Your choice." 8 years of late nights and silent sacrifices boiled in my chest. I could feel my pulse in my throat, a heat that threatened to spill into words I might never be able to take back. But instead of snapping, I straightened, letting the silence stretch until his grin faltered. Behind him, through the glass of the boardroom, I caught sight of Victor Lang, Knoxwell's CEO. He stood alone at the head of the table, sharp in a navy suit, flipping through my printed slides with a focus that made my heart thud. He wasn't glancing, he was studying. My work, the work Trent had stolen, was in his hands like a classified dossier. I realized, in that breath, that this was the moment my life had been circling. Either I would nod and disappear into another year of invisible labor, or I would step off this treadmill and take whatever came with it. I nodded once to Trent, calm enough to make him squint, and turned toward the boardroom doors. My heels clicked against the marble like a countdown as I crossed the threshold to face Knoxwell's executives. The Knoxwell boardroom felt like a stage the moment I stepped inside. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline in sharp, sunlit lines, and a long table gleamed under recessed lighting. A dozen executives sat waiting, their faces a careful mix of curiosity and expectation. Trent hovered near the head of the table, pretending confidence, clutching his coffee like a prop. I set my laptop down and connected the clicker with hands that didn't tremble. The first slide lit up on the massive screen, my name in bold across the title Jessica Hartman, Strategic Workshop Lead. For a moment, I simply stood there, letting it settle. I had never seen my name in lights like that before. A quiet hum rose in my chest, and then I spoke. "I wasn't consulted on this free arrangement," I said, my voice even, filling the glass room. "I won't lead the session under those terms." Silence fell like a curtain. A pen dropped somewhere down the table. I didn't explain, didn't apologize. I clicked the remote to black out the slides, closed my laptop, and slipped it into my bag. As I walked toward the door, my heels struck the polished floor in a steady rhythm that felt like a countdown to my own freedom. I passed Trent without looking at him. I didn't need to see his face to know it had gone the shade of boiled beet. The hallway felt cooler, brighter. By the time I reached the lobby and pushed through the glass doors into the July heat, I could breathe for the first time in years. I made it halfway across the parking lot before I heard my name. Jessica. I turned to see Victor Lang striding toward me, jacket off, tie loosened, a small rectangle of mat card between his fingers. His expression was calm but sharp, like a man confirming something he already knew. "I know whose work I saw today," he said, holding out the card. "Let's talk." The weight of that card in my hand felt like a hinge turning. The air suddenly brighter and the city noisier, alive with possibilities as I walked to my car, gripping my bag and that card like they were one and the same. The next morning, I arrived at the little cafe in River North 15 minutes early, heart thumping as if the whole city could hear it. The place smelled of espresso and burnt sugar, sunlight stretching across the brick walls and polished wood tables. I picked a corner seat, gripping Victor Lang's mat card in my palm like it might vanish if I loosened my fingers. He walked in exactly on time. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind, just him. Crisp in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt with the top button undone. Looking like a man who didn't need to announce his presence to own a room, he greeted me by name. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt seen. "Jessica," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me. Let's get straight to it." I nodded, barely trusting my voice. "We've had concerns about your firm for months," he continued, lowering his tone just enough to make the hum of the cafe fade around us. "Redundant content, poor follow-through, numbers that don't add up. Yesterday confirmed what I suspected. You're the one doing the work. He's the one taking the credit. Hearing someone else say it out loud was like a window opening in a stuffy room." I exhaled slowly, the weight of years starting to shift. "I want to explore a direct consulting arrangement," he said. "Discreet, you'll evaluate our current vendor training programs, identify gaps, and propose a scalable framework. If it works, we move forward with a larger engagement. No trend, no middleman." My pulse quickened. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. I imagined my name on the slides, not hidden in footnotes, but on the cover page. My work. Finally mine. We shook hands before parting, and the card in my pocket no longer felt like a lifeline. It felt like a key. That night, back in my apartment overlooking the river, I opened a blank notebook and began sketching modules, compliance paths, and a plan that belonged to me. I wrote Northbeam across the top of the page and circled it twice before picking up my laptop. By the end of that week, Northbeam Consulting LLC existed on paper, at least. I filed the paperwork online from the small dining table in my apartment, the river glinting through the window as if the city itself was winking at my audacity. My old company still thought of me as disposable, and here I was, building something they couldn't touch. I started by pulling every client-facing module I had ever created or updated, sifting through years of digital debris. The files were a graveyard of recycled slides, outdated screenshots, and compliance manuals that had been copy-pasted from one client to another. Some were stamped with Trent's initials, but the content was my work, watered down and stripped of context. The more I dug, the worse it got. Whole training paths were stitched together with dead links, missing assessments, and best practice slides that were 3 years out of date. Compliance gaps leapt out like flashing hazard signs. If a real audit had landed on Trent's desk, it would have burned through our entire client roster in a month. Then I found it, the KPI report he'd submitted to Knoxwell the quarter before. The numbers didn't just look polished, they were impossible. Completion rates at 98%, error reductions in double digits, all tied to programs I knew hadn't even been fully deployed. I cross-checked timestamps, server logs, and raw exports I'd saved out of paranoia. He'd fabricated half the data. My pulse hammered. This wasn't just bad practice. It was the kind of lie that could trigger a formal investigation. If Knoxwell ever connected the dots, Trent wouldn't just lose the account. He could take the whole company down with him. I sat back in my chair, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the window behind me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had the proof of everything he'd tried to bury, and I knew exactly how to use it. I started drafting my first audit report for Knoxwell, highlighting risks in clean, sharp language, and labeling every slide with a name they'd never seen before Northbeam Consulting. 2 weeks later, I stood in Knoxwell's 18th floor boardroom. The city stretched out beneath the glass walls like a map of everything I had been too afraid to claim. My presentation was cued, the heat map glowing on the screen in bold colors: green for solid vendors, yellow for those on watch, and a single, undeniable red block pulsing in the lower corner: Trent Solutions, high risk, low performance. The room was silent except for the faint click of my remote as I moved through the slides. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The numbers, the screenshots, and the side-by-side comparisons told the story better than any speech could. Every recycled module, every compliance gap, every fake KPI was there, translated into risk in dollars, across the table. Victor Lang leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, the faintest hint of satisfaction in his eyes. When the last slide faded, Levi Fay, Knoxwell's compliance director, spoke first. "Thank you, Jessica. That's clear," she said. Then, turning to the others, she added, "Effective immediately. We'll suspend engagement with this vendor, remove them from the preferred list, and cancel their summit slots." There was no debate, no argument, just a quiet flurry of pens and phones as the decision moved into action. My old company, the one I had given my nights and weekends to, had just been erased from Knoxwell's inner circle with a few strokes of ink and a handful of keystrokes. That afternoon, as I worked from my apartment, an email popped up from a competing vendor I'd met once. "In passing, heard you're replacing Trent. Need a partner?" I stared at the message, a slow smile spreading for the first time. I wasn't a ghost behind someone else's curtain. I was visible, and people were starting to notice. I closed my laptop and leaned back, the city lights flickering on outside, feeling the hum of momentum under my skin as if the ground itself was shifting in my favor. The envelope slid under my apartment door like a threat dressed in corporate stationery. I picked it up, heavy with embossed letterhead, and read the bold subject line: "Cease and desist. Unauthorized client engagement and misappropriation." Trent's signature scrawled across the bottom like he'd pressed the pen hard enough to dent the paper. The accusations were a storm of legal jargon: client theft, solicitation, misuse of intellectual property. Each line was a dagger meant to scare me back into the shadows. For a moment, it worked. My hands shook as I sat on the floor, reading it twice, 3 times, feeling the old, familiar grip of his control. I scanned the room as if the walls might answer the question pounding in my head. What if he could still ruin me instead of replying? I forwarded the document to Levi Fay at Knoxwell with a single note: "Incoming circus. Thoughts?" Her response came in less than 15 minutes. Already flagged. Sit tight. By the next morning, Knoxwell's legal team called. Their associate counsel spoke with the calm precision of someone who had gutted men like Trent before breakfast. "Jessica, he has no footing," she said, holding the letter up to her webcam as if it were evidence in a trial. "We've reviewed your contract and your LLC registration. You were never bound by a non-compete or exclusivity clause. He's bluffing." Then she leaned closer, her voice lowering with the kind of finality that could chill a room. "And, for the record, we've confirmed that the KPI report he submitted last quarter was falsified. If he continues this, we'll escalate for investigation that night." I lay awake staring at the ceiling, mind racing with every nightmare scenario: news articles, courtrooms, whispers in the industry. But as the hours passed, fear turned into something steadier. I didn't need to shout or defend or retaliate. I had the truth, and I had silence, and together, they were stronger than anything Trent could throw at me. By the next week, Knoxwell invited me back to the 18th floor for a meeting that would leave no doubt about who held the power now. The boardroom felt different when I walked in this time. No nerves, no weight pressing against my chest, just a calm. Focused certainty as I set my notes at the head of the table. The skyline glittered beyond the glass, a quiet witness to what was about to unfold. Executives filed in, nodding politely, and I began the vendor evaluation meeting with the smooth confidence of someone who finally owned her voice. My slides detailed every audit heat maps, compliance gaps, performance charts that left no room for excuses. Northbeam's recommendations were clear, and the room listened without interruption. Halfway through the presentation, the door opened without a knock. Trent. He slipped inside like a ghost of a man, pale and drawn. Scanning faces for recognition or sympathy, none came. Phone stayed down, eyes fixed on me. The only sound was the quiet hiss of the HVAC and his uneven breathing as he hesitated at the far end of the table. Victor Lang didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply leaned back in his chair, watching the scene unfold with the patience of someone who already knew the ending. I let the silence stretch, then folded my hands on the table. "We'll be reviewing all past performance," I said, my tone steady but cold enough to bite. "You may take a seat." He obeyed, the leather chair whispering under his weight. No one passed him a packet. No one looked his way. I clicked to the next slide, and the data did the talking. He couldn't escape red flags, missed deadlines, falsified numbers, all projected larger than life on the glass walls of his former dominance. The meeting ended without ceremony. People gathered their notes and phones, murmuring about next steps. Trent remained silent, smaller than I'd ever seen him. I lingered at the head of the table, letting the quiet victories settle into my bones. Before rising to meet Victor's eye as he gestured toward the adjoining conference room for the conversation that would seal what came next, Victor's voice was steady as he slid the folder across the table. "Executive advisor," he said, "equity in the training platform, flexible schedule. We want you leading the next phase, not just consulting from the edges." I opened the folder, scanning the terms, a 6-figure base, equity milestones, and my name officially tied to the framework I had built from scratch. For a moment, I let the weight of it sink in the culmination of every late night, every invisible slide deck, every quiet sacrifice. I didn't gloat. I didn't think about running to LinkedIn or sending a smug email. My mind was already on Northbeam. Knoxwell had referred me to 2 new clients in the past month, and for the first time in my career, I was working under my own banner. My calls ended with my company's name, my invoices bore my signature, and my evenings were spent designing solutions I actually believed in. Months passed, and the world that had once seemed so small began to expand. I signed my second retainer client in Denver, and another in Austin, each one coming from a quiet recommendation that started with Knoxwell. My old fear of losing everything had been replaced by a steady current of ownership and possibility. One Tuesday morning, as I cleared my inbox before a flight, I saw it, a job application, from Trent Mallory. I stared at it for a long moment, the subject line blinking like some strange echo from another life. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. Instead, I forwarded it to a contact at a modest vendor firm and typed a single line, "He's available. You might teach him something." I hit send, leaned back, and let the quiet satisfaction settle in. The last workshop I ran wasn't free, it just had a different invoice, and this time, it had my name on it.